And so I just want to briefly use this space as an opportunity to talk a little bit about the grant as a whole, to offer a sort of 30,000-foot view on what we intend to do over the course of the next 3 years. And because all good ideas start on walks with dogs, this talk is brought to you by a walk with my dog yesterday morning. So this will be brief and it's informal. So I want to talk about our grant in terms of the title. So every good academic title has a colon. So I'm going to start with the first two bits from before the colon, the civil rights and the civic virtue piece. And then I'll talk a little bit about what follows that in terms of what we mean for forming character through community. So let's start with civil rights. As you heard in the previous speaker's talk, we are in a really unique location. Right? So Montgomery is the birthplace of the civil rights movement. There's such a rich and complicated history in this area, and it can become a unique space for learning beyond the classroom. So part of the goal of the grant is to increase civil rights literacy, that is to help the campus community, faculty, staff, and students better understand civil rights history, the civil rights movement, but not just look at the history, but to understand individual heroes, ordinary citizens who engaged in civic action to seek change and to learn from their individual lives. So a big portion of this grant is focused on our unique location as a space or a site for learning beyond the classroom spaces. And this is in part, we want to understand Montgomery better, we want to understand the civil rights movement better, we want to understand individual exemplars of civic virtue and action in our spaces. Last semester when I was teaching a critical reasoning class on a completely different context, a student wrote a reflection journal about her own parent, who was the first African-American firefighter in Selma, and talked about that, fire chief, I should say, in Selma, Alabama, and talked about her respect for him and the ways in which he had to work towards that role in that space. And there are so many hidden stories of this sort because so many of our students come from the local spaces, and we have so much to learn from them in these contexts. So this is a place-based, community-engaged form of learning that seeks to draw upon Montgomery's unique space and civil rights history. Civic virtue. This is language that's foreign to many people outside of the discipline of philosophy, or sometimes people use the language in ways that philosophers might not recognize. So what do we mean by this specifically? Well, virtues are just personal qualities, they're dispositions, they're character traits that enable you to live excellently, and civic virtues as a member of a community, right? So sometimes these are described as the personal traits or qualities of a good citizen, right? What makes you a good citizen? If you look at the history of philosophy, if you look at the discussion of virtues, what you find is there's lots of philosophers who disagree about what should be on the canonical lists of virtues or what counts as a vice, and there's lots of disagreements about how to understand these. So rather than embroil ourselves in those long-standing debates, what we've done is we want to focus on exemplars of civic virtue and action in our own spaces and draw from them lessons that we can learn about traits of character that are crucial to living well together. So in this context, we've selected 5 focal virtues that we see enacted in the lives of civil rights heroes. And these are the virtues of justice, courage, hope, perseverance, and solidarity. So again, these are their personal qualities that enable one to live well within a society. Justice is a motivational virtue. It moves you to seek out and to ensure that everyone has what they deserve. Courage is a virtue of self-management. It's what enables you as a person to manage threats, especially threats that cause fear, and to do so in a way that is consistent with the good ends that you're seeking. Hope is a weird virtue. It's a virtue that enables you to strive and to pursue good things, desirable things that are difficult to obtain, right? So it's a virtue that enables you to pursue those things. Perseverance is a toughening virtue. It's that virtue which enables you to pursue good goals which are long delayed. And then finally, the virtue of solidarity is a virtue that moves you to be together with and for others who are engaged in a common pursuit. So that's a very loose and quick version of those. But the point is, we see these sorts of traits enacted in the lives of individuals in the civil rights movement, and we want to see them as exemplars of civic virtue in action and learn from their lives. So from civil rights to civic virtue, we're a place-based, community-engaged learning opportunities focused on virtues that we see enacted in the lives of civil rights heroes. Now to the part that follows the colon, because again, every academic title needs a colon, right? So forming character. Here we're drawing on a rich history in philosophy, but also a long-standing history in philosophy, but also recent work in empirical work in psychology and in cognitive science about ways to improve learning. And so philosophers have always talked about habituation and practices as ways to develop character. Here, the practices that we're most interested in are practices of service, right, within our community, but also practices of reflection and dialogue. So we're going to have intentionally structured means of serving in our communities, serving with each other and within our local spaces. We're going to have opportunities for structured forms of dialogue together within small communities, and we're going to have opportunities for personal reflection throughout. Reflection and dialogue are key here. This was mentioned in the previous talk, but it's also a component of, like, what does it mean to really reflect on our learning, to really take ownership of our learning? And then finally is engagement with exemplars. There are so many stories that you can read and you can draw insight from, and within the last 10 years or so, there's been a great deal of attention within empirical psychology, but also in philosophy and in theology and other disciplines on looking at the lives of heroes or saints or others, people who we admire, and to draw insights from them about ways in which we might try to emulate them within our own contexts. So these are some of the strategies of character formation. And then through community. So the big pitch from Templeton when we saw the initial funding initiative was they were really interested on forming character through community. This is the Character Through Community project. And they were interested in communities of practice. And for me, this was a new term, right? So I've heard the term learning communities before, but communities of practice are really small groups of people, voluntary associations, where individuals are united by a sort of common concern, and they get together, they talk, they reflect, they engage with each other in order to better understand and to improve their practices oriented towards that concern. So what we've done in this grant is to build structured communities of practice within the grant opportunity. We'll have opportunity for faculty fellows, communities of practice, and those will be faculty from hopefully across all the colleges, the library, and the UNIV program to work on individual projects that they can embed within classrooms or within their learning environments. And then we'll have civic engagement communities of practice, and these will be broader, but they'll include faculty, staff, and students to engage in common readings together, who engage in community service together. So those are the two broad families of communities of practice that we'll be structuring. So this brings me, again, I should have planned for the lighting in the room, but there are some opportunities that we have that we want to alert you to now, and you'll hear more about these as the grant gets going, right? So this is the kickoff event. The first opportunity that we're going to announce and that we are announcing is for people to apply to become faculty fellows in the first cohort. And that cohort begins, I think the deadline we're placing on those applications is a few weeks from now. So if you're interested in becoming a faculty fellow, there will be at the end a QR code and a URL where you can go look at the syllabus with expectations for faculty fellows, and you can start thinking about how you might build a project into your courses for the spring, right? So that will be the first opportunity, but this is also, in addition to being a kickoff event, the inaugural event for Civil Rights and Civic Virtue Society, which we're forming on campus, which will be open for all staff, students, and faculty. We'll host events, we'll host speakers, we'll have an annual conference every spring, and we'll host in that annual conference the people who have been involved with the Faculty Fellows Program will share the results of their work. This coming spring, I think I can announce this, that we're going to partner with HHMI, who's also doing a spring conference where they present some of their work. This is a different funding initiative, grant initiative on campus. We're holding this together. We'll have an annual summer seminar, which will be a week-long intense experience, and it will be an opportunity for faculty and students to go to spaces downtown to learn together about the civil rights history of this area and to think deeply about civic virtues together. And then from the participants in that summer seminar, they'll form the civic engagement communities of practice, which we will then open up to other members of campus. So again, the communities of practice I just mentioned a little bit earlier, but hopefully what we're hoping to do over the next 3 years is to create opportunities for faculty, staff, and students to engage deeply within our community, to see our community as an asset for learning, our own learning, for our students' learning, and for seeing ourselves as engaged in a project that will hopefully cultivate deeper civic mindedness, deeper virtue in our whole campus community, so that we can continue the pursuit of justice, so that we can continue the good work that we see enacted in the lives of those who brought about such great change in this area. So that's a rough and 30,000-foot view of a grant project that took a year to develop, and which we're excited to share with the campus